All right, rejoining the channel is our good friend Jack Murphy. You guys may remember we had Jack on the channel a few months ago, or geez, it's been like a year now, I guess. After I had been on his channel, we did sort of a reciprocal thing. I've known Jack for a long time, ever since I was the editor of military.com in the aughts. And Jack was fresh from the war and used his GI Bill to get a poli-sci degree at Columbia, and then decided he wanted to venture into the military journalism world. And so we were happy to have him do some freelance work for us there. And now he's part of the Team House YouTube channel. Again, I've been a guest on their channel, and we rambled on for, geez, Jack, it was like 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
It was a long episode. We solved first all the problems in the military, and then we solved all the political problems. So if you haven't seen that episode, and you have 2.5 hours to kill, check it out. But I wanted to bring Jack on for some perspective and commentary around the most recent IDF hostage rescue mission, which by all accounts was incredible, heroic, and complex. So, Jack, let me go over the high points here of this particular mission. So this was a rescue mission into Nuseirat in central Gaza. It had the codename Summer Seeds. This rescue mission was carried out in broad daylight. Have you ever conducted a high-risk mission in daylight?
Yes, for sure. Direct action missions, but never a hostage rescue mission. That puts a totally different spin on what happened here. From what I've read, they used some elements of deception like they did in the Entebbe raid and the IDF has used on other counterterrorism raids in years past. In this case, disguising themselves as Palestinian refugees that were moving from one zone to the next. That was sort of their cover story to get the assault force close to the target buildings without being compromised, which, achieving surprise is probably the most important part of an operation like this. Again, normally you might want to use the cover of darkness, but I'm sure for their operational reasons, they decided that a daylight raid was a plausible option for them, obviously.
Now, this was the National Police Special Anti-Terror Unit of Yamam. IDF spokesman, who we've mentioned before since October 7th, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, said, quote, "In the daytime, you take more risks to make sure the surprise element is kept. And we understood that inside the flats, it would give us leverage. We surprised them completely, but this mission was still hard." So the 4 freed hostages are Noah Argamani, who's 25 years old. She was kind of the face of the October 7th kidnapping. She was captured looking very distraught as she was thrown into a vehicle and taken from that Nova music festival. In fact, all 4 of these hostages were taken at that music festival on October 7th. The others rescued were Almog Meirjan, he's 21, Andriy Koslov, 27, and Shlomi Ziv, who's 40. And so they've been held for 8 months. They were held in what's described as a heavily civilian populated area above ground in buildings of 3 and 4 stories. And therein lives the complexity of this mission, as you've already described. So these hostages had been locked in 2 separate apartments in civilian multi-story buildings. These 2 buildings were about 650 feet apart. The female Noah Argamani was held in a different building from the 3 men, and they were frequently moved, which is sort of ops normal for when they're holding hostages. The Air Force gathered intelligence from the air in the last few days using drones primarily. And IDF and Shin Bet, which is the law enforcement intelligence organization, created conditions to reach the targets without the terrorists shooting the hostages first. So obviously, that's the most important element in this nature of raid.
Yeah. And I mean, the next part of it, of course, is, Gaza, was sort of a fortress, in a sense, an urban fortress. And much of it is in rubble now, but it's still an extremely difficult area to operate in. So it becomes a question of, okay, you achieved surprise. rescued these hostages. Now the question is, how do you get out? And it sounds like there was, a substantial firefight on the way out. The Gaza Health Ministry says something like 274 civilians were killed in the crossfire. That sounds like a high number to me from, a small assault force. But I mean, you might want to take that large number with a grain of salt, but it does sound like there was some sort of firefight on the way off target.
What the IDF statement describes as dozens of terrorists with RPGs and machine guns who ran through the alleys towards the target. This starts to feel like Black Hawk Down.
And that's the fear, right? I mean, you get a bird shot down over Gaza. I mean, you're in a world of hurt, and it totally changes the dynamics of what you're trying to do. And I wrote previously about the American Joint Special Operations Command spinning up right after October 7th. They landed in Cyprus 10 days after October 7th, and were staging to do a hostage rescue because there are American citizens that are being held too. And that was like one of the big problems was, yeah, you can get in there. We can fly birds in there. We can, take boats into Gaza, all sorts of different options. But then how do you get out? And, if you have a dozen operators killed on the operation to rescue 5 hostages, is that worth it? That's a difficult decision that, policymakers have to make.
The other thing that they detail here, Jack, is, and this again starts to feel like Black Hawk Down, is the vehicle that held the hostages that they were exfilling with got stuck. Now, at this point, the complexity of this ramps up like 2x.
As part of their mission rehearsals, I'm sure they rehearsed this and what to do if one vehicle goes down. And there's a concept called min force or minimal force. So say you're on driving towards the target with 5 vehicles loaded full of soldiers, and one vehicle breaks down, you have 4 left. Do you continue with the operation or do you abort? That was the question, of course, that Charlie Beckwith had to make at Desert One, where he had, I believe, 2, if not 3 helicopters deadlined at Desert One, and he has to make the call. Do we have minimum force? It was actual General Vaught back at the Pentagon had to make the call, but he put it back on Charlie Beckwith and made him decide. And they were below their minimum force threshold, so Charlie made the right decision to abort the operation. And I'm sure they have a similar concept for this force as well. And, when they had a breakdown, on the way off target, I'm sure they had rehearsed different contingencies and scenarios. And there's probably some vehicle recovery drills and also, potentially cross-loading vehicles and just abandoning that one in place if it was necessary.
So to your point, I don't know if what they outline here was a contingency or part of the original plan. But when that vehicle got stuck, Division 98 paratroopers jumped into the battle to assist with the vehicle rescue. Also, at least 2 special ops H-53s flew into the theater in broad daylight. And that's where we get this dramatic, it looks like taken from a drone FLIR overhead of the H-53 on the ground and the rescued hostages being ushered onto that pavlo. So at that point, they're quickly exfilled and mission success.
Sometime during the operation, Commander Zamora was killed. It looks like he was the senior officer on the ground for this operation.
IDF statement said the fire plan that was executed was focused but extremely powerful. Cooperation with Shin Bet and Yamam rose to several levels into a single operational system, as we know. And you mentioned Desert One. There were some hard lessons learned there about multi-unit integration. Yeah. We didn't quite have our act together at that point, which is why SOCOM was created in the wake of that failure. They list 4 keys, and this will be kind of something that are tenets that you've dealt with many times. 4 keys to the operation: deception, surprise, determination, and power.
It is very similar to what Americans would call surprise, speed, and violence of action in the U.S. military when conducting these types of operations. And again, surprise is the first word for a reason, because if you don't achieve surprise, then your speed and violence of action isn't going to do you a lot of good. So yeah, it sounds quite familiar. In deception, with an operation like this, there is a deception element involved in it, which makes perfect sense considering what they were trying to do.
There's some joy in Israel as a function of this, but immediately following that, there's a reminder that there are still 120 hostages being held. There remains no clear path to a ceasefire or cessation of hostilities. Both sides are sort of on different poles with respect to what are the terms that would be acceptable. A couple of things that have been rumored that we want to lay to rest. First, the humanitarian pier complex, which has been reestablished after being destroyed by a storm, was not used as a launching point for this operation. And also, and check me on this, Jack, no American assets were used in the conduct of the operation.
I asked about this and was told that this was a unilateral Israeli operation. And if we contributed like intelligence or support to this, it was rather superficial. It was really their show.
You mentioned the Gaza Health Ministry claimed 250 some odd civilians were killed. The IDF has come up with this infographic that says 4 hostages rescued and 210 terrorists killed.
I suspect that what happened was that during the exfil off target, the Israelis probably did a bunch of airstrikes to cover their withdrawal. And that's probably where most of the casualties came from.
So we'll also note, in terms of the propaganda, the info war, Hamas tweeted a statement from Abu Obaidah on the al-Nusrat massacre. They use the word massacre. It says, what the Zionist enemy carried out in the Nusrat area in the central Gaza Strip is a compounded war crime, and the first to be harmed by it are its captives. The enemy managed to liberate some of its captives by committing horrific massacres, but at the same time, it killed some of them during the operation. So what the claim here is, the IDF rescue force actually killed some hostages during the course of rescuing the 4 hostages. We have no information from the IDF side that that was the case.
I mean, I have a lot of criticisms about, indiscriminate airstrikes that the Israelis have done since this campaign started, but I really can't fault them for launching a hostage rescue mission to rescue their people. And I mean, if there was a massacre carried out, I'm pretty sure that Hamas would be broadcasting that all over the internet right now, if that had actually occurred.
Certainly, the IDF is satisfied that they minimized civilian casualties to the degree it was possible in order to accomplish this mission. Certainly, a violent firefight on the way out doesn't help that in terms of minimizing civilian casualties. The IDF did admit there were some civilians caught in the crossfire as they were egressing.
It's very unfortunate, and you try to avoid it as much as possible, but you start dropping bombs and in densely populated areas where civilians live. And I mean, it's unfortunately going to happen. And I'm not saying it's okay. Again, you want to minimize that, but it is a reality of fighting this kind of conflict.
So, Jack, thanks for joining us, kind of no notice from the greater Brooklyn area. And we invite our viewers to check you out and Dave at the Team House. Very cool YouTube channel and podcast. And if you haven't read Jack's book, Murphy's Law, it basically is his autobiography, and it very much outlines how he got where he is and the action that he saw when he was downrange. So look forward to having you on again soon, Jack. Hopefully we can see each other in real life before too long as well.
All right. Thank you, Ward.
All right. That'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything going forward. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.